So, you want to play Flesh and Blood, but you're not sure how to play. Let me give you a detailed look into the game, and hopefully by the end of it, you will have a better idea of Flesh and Blood and can continue your journey into this wonderful TCG. Welcome on in, Dragonfolk, to a tabletop simulator tutorial for Flesh and Blood. Today, I'm going to be going over the two Uprising Blitz decks that are pretty cheap to pick up and something that can get you into the game immediately. And I'll go about showing you how to play the game and how to respond to combat chains and so on and so forth, and give you a good personalized idea of how this game works. So, first, we have to find out what Flesh and Blood is, right? Flesh and Blood is a game, a trading card game, that it is you against another hero. These two heroes are essentially fighting in Flesh and Blood, and while there are some online ways for you to play Flesh and Blood, it is not actually supported by the studio that does Flesh and Blood, Legend Story Studios. That is because the purpose behind Flesh and Blood is to play the game in Flesh and Blood. It is for paper play specifically. So you will never see, as far as I can tell, you will never see any kind of online presence or tournament of a sort, unless it is something over, something like Spell Table or of the sort that will kind of allow people to replicate a tournament, but those will not be sanctioned by Legend Story Studios. That could be done by like LGSs or something of the sort. But you're pretty much playing in Flesh and Blood. That's the whole point. And in Flesh and Blood, you start off your entire process in the game by choosing a hero. This is Dromai. You may have seen her in a couple of our other videos here. Dromai is the hero that I personally play in the constructed format. Blitz is just a kind of shortened version of Classic Constructed, 20 less cards in your deck, and no sideboard, and the life total of your hero is cut in half. So this is an important thing to note specifically for Blitz, because if you're trying to do anything highly competitive, you will be looking more so into Classic Constructed. But Blitz plays pretty much the same. The only difference is you can only have two versions of a card in your deck as opposed to 3, 40 card maximum deck, and half your life, and no sideboard. So what is a hero, right? Well, I'll go ahead and show you Dromai. So Dromai, you can see down in the bottom middle of the card, there is a little blurb there that says Draconic Illusionist Hero, Young. Anything that's for Blitz or any of these other formats other than Classic Constructed will use the Young hero. But otherwise, if you have one that is not young, it's just an adult version. It just doesn't say young. It won't say adult, but it will not say young. And in this case, you see Dromai is a Draconic Illusionist hero. Now, of course, this could mean nothing to you right now, right? But what this determines is the cards that you're able to put into your deck and the equipment that you are allowed to wear. So, for instance, Draconic is the subtype, while Illusionist is the class. So, Dromai is able to have Draconic cards, Illusionist cards, Draconic Illusionist cards, and generic cards in her deck. This allows for a bunch of different ways to play these subtyped heroes, but usually they tend to focus around one specific thing that the hero does. For instance, Dromai creates dragons. That is her big thing. She fights with dragons. And that is very important because next we will talk about what a weapon looks like. But first, let's go ahead and look at the bottom two corners of this card here. You'll see in the blue over there, you have a 4. That is indicating your intellect. This is how many cards that you draw up to at the end of your turn. You do not draw cards at the beginning of your turn unless you have a card on the board that says so. you draw your cards at the end of your turn and only up to your intellect number. You also, on the right side, in the right corner there, have the health of your hero, indicated by the green circle and green symbol there. So Dromai has 20 health and 4 intellect. She also has an ability, as every hero does have an ability, so kind of figure out what hero you're looking to play and make your choice from there. Dromai, of course, is big on making dragons. Dragons require ash, which is a material that Dromai makes when you pitch a red card. We will get into pitching in just a little bit here. So let's go ahead and talk about our weapons. So in this case, Dromai's weapon with this deck is a Storm of Sandakai. This is a Draconic Illusionist weapon, which means this can only be used by Draconic Illusionists. It is also a two-handed weapon, denoted by that little in parentheses from the bottom part of the card. You'll see that there are 2 weapon slots for every hero, but if this is a two-handed weapon, you cannot have another weapon. So keep that in mind. Warriors sometimes can get one-handed weapons. Assassin has 2 one-handed weapons, essentially. So depending on the weapon style you decide to choose, you can go with that. But not every hero only has one weapon. There are several ways to build a hero. This is just one of them. So for Storm of Sandakai, you see that it says dragon allies you control have once per turn action, pay 0 to attack. This is important because you can see there is no attack value of any kind on this weapon. That is because Dromai does not attack with her weapon. This is very much so different compared to FaB. FaB is a ninja, same deal, 4 intellect, 20 health. He's a draconic ninja hero. And his weapon has an attack value. That is that bottom left corner there, that yellow symbol. That represents the attack value. So what FaB can do is pay those 2 little red dots there. We call those resources. You can pay 2 resources to attack your opponent with this weapon. And then if you control 2 or more Draconic Chain Links, Searing Emberblade has go again. We will go over that stuff during the Chain Link section of this tutorial. Like I said, anything can be changed in regards to the equipment that a hero will play. And so that is also true for this equipment over here. You have 4 pieces of equipment that your hero can wear beside your weapon. That is a headpiece, a chest piece, arms, and legs. You're going to want to have 4 pieces of equipment. There's a lot of equipment out there, a lot of common and rare equipment you can use until you can start getting yourself up to those legendary equipment levels. And these will do you just fine. With these being the case, I won't go over them, but essentially you will see that these all have a little symbol in the bottom right. You see right there. So that symbol down there represents its defense value. Now, none of this equipment has a defense value. Although if you do look at Ironhide Helm, you will see that the next time you defend with this, you can pay a resource and it will gain 2 armor and destroy it when the combat chain closes. So in theory, this does actually count towards defending. And you can defend with the pieces of armor you have. Just use them sparingly, though, because it does tend to be more efficient at the end of the game as opposed to at the beginning of the game. And although some of this armor, and mostly the more powerful armors such as Majestics and Legendaries, they will have effects. And you can utilize those effects throughout the game without destroying your armor. So it is very important to utilize that, but for right now, we won't go over what the armor does. I will just kind of let you know there's 4 pieces of armor and a weapon. Those are your 5 pieces here. So now that we are familiar with that, we need to go over the cards that we will see in our deck. Again, we are a Draconic Illusionist hero. So we can expect to see Draconic Illusionist, and generic cards in our deck. So we'll go ahead, and at the beginning of our turn, let's just assume I'm going first. I will go ahead and draw 4 cards here. And my opponent will also draw 4 cards. So now that my opponent has 4 cards and I have 4 cards, I will proceed to go first. But before we actually begin the actual gameplay, let's talk about what the cards look like. This is an action card. There are several different kinds of action cards, and they can all be denoted by that same place that you found the typing for your hero in the bottom middle of the card. This is a Draconic Illusionist action, Attack. There are several different kinds of action cards, such as attack reactions, defense reactions, just actions, as well as instants that you can play too. Instants you can play at any time during either you or your opponent's turn, and do not require any kind of action point for you to play them. Speaking of action points, we do start out our turn with 1 action point. What this does is allow us to do 1 move and 1 move only, and then of course if we gain any action points on top of that, we can then start a new chain to start doing more stuff. But you'll see again by this attack thing here, there's a lot more in the corners now. And I'll go ahead and explain what each one is. In the top right of this card, you will see a 0. That is this card's cost. You will find the costs of cards in the top right of them. But how do you pay for cards? Well, like I had said previously, there are these little things that you use to pay, almost a currency of sorts, called resources. Much like mana, in a way. So, resources are denoted by the top left of a card. This card, Dust Up, actually pitches for 1 resource. There are 3 kinds of cards in different colors that you can actually find, but in both of these decks, actually, these Uprising Blitz decks, you're more than likely to find red cards. That's because that is how they work, is they focus strictly on a lot of red stuff. So for instance, this Dust Up pitches for 1. Now what do I mean by pitch? There is a pitch zone to the left of your deck. That is where you are going to put the cards that you will use to pay for your cost. So for example, I will go ahead and start my turn, and we'll just use this as an example. I will go ahead and play Critical Strike. It is a generic action. I will go ahead and put this card right here on the combat chain. Now, this starts the combat chain. What I need to do is pay for this Critical Strike, because in the top right, it does say that it costs 1 resource. So, I will need to put 1 of these cards into my pitch zone in order for me to pay for that. So I'll go ahead and put this into my pitch zone. The 1 helps me pay for the 1. So because this is 1 resource in the top left, I now have 1 resource to pay for this, and it is now fully paid. Like I said, there are different colors to cards. Yellow pitches for 2 resources, and blue pitches for 3 resources. So, of course, this all differs depending on decks, but right now, I'm kind of just giving you an idea of how the game runs. So, I am now attacking my opponent for 5 damage, denoted by that little yellow symbol in the bottom left. So that means that it is now priority passed to my opponent. So here we are on my opponent's side. Now, it all depends on the hero that you plan to play, but defending with cards obviously gives you a big advantage to not taking a ton of damage. So, in FaB's case, we have a bunch of cards that, as you can see in the bottom right of the card, have a defense value. This one has a defense value of 2. This one has a defense value of 2. This one has a defense value of 3. And this has a defense value of 3. So, in this situation, we can block Critical Strike with cards from our hand. Let's say we wanted to go ahead and take this one that goes for 3, and this one, actually this one, that goes for 2. So 3 defense, 2 defense, that maths out to 5 defense value. Blocking, 5 attack. Now, Normally, you would think that this is just done, right? But what you can actually do is at this point, the opponent can choose to use an attack reaction. So this is how the combat chain works. First, you attack. Then your opponent chooses defense cards. Then you have an opportunity to activate attack reactions. Then your opponent has an opportunity to choose defense reactions. Once you have passed the defense step or the blocking step, you cannot put any more cards down here to defend unless they are defense actions. So keep that in mind. You're going to want to make sure that even if you feel like you can fully block, your opponent may have something to give this 5 an additional 3 damage. So therefore, hitting you in the face. Now, as a Dromai player, I know there are no attack reactions in this deck. So, I will not be doing any attack reactions as a Dromai, which means that now it comes back to FaB to do defense reactions. Normally, when you fully block an attack, you do not want to actually use any defense reactions. So, you can just go ahead and finish this off. Now, the real kicker here is that this does not have Go Again. Go Again would allow Dromai to attack with another card from their hand, or at least use another card from their hand. But unfortunately, this does not have Go Again, so that will end the chain. I do not have anything to give Go Again, so that is how that will be. You did have to realize, and something that I did not specifically go over, because this isn't the case with everybody, but when Dromai pitches a red card, Dromai gets an Ash token. This Ash token is going to be used to make dragons later on in the game. So just keep that in mind for Dromai. Anyway, we're back here, and the entire thing has been blocked. So now, because there's no Go Again, we are going to go ahead and put all of these cards into our graveyards. And then we move towards the end step. What you do first is you take your pitch zone cards, anything that you may have put in your pitch zone. You'll go ahead and, if you have multiple cards, you can stack them in any order, and you can then go ahead and put them under your deck. No shuffling or anything of the sort, just put them directly under your deck. Then you have an opportunity to use the arsenal. The arsenal is a little spot underneath your hero that allows you to essentially save a card for later. So it's very nice because you essentially will start your turn, if you don't block anything, with a 5-card hand, being able to utilize something from the arsenal zone. But the arsenal zone is very, very finicky in the way that it works, because you can only play cards from the arsenal zone. You cannot pitch from the arsenal zone, and you cannot defend with cards from the arsenal zone unless they are defense reactions. Defense reactions can be used from the arsenal because it is a card you are playing to defend with, as opposed to a card you are taking from your hand and using to defend. So, a weird thing, but Arsenal likes to keep it pretty fresh. So what I'll go ahead and do is I'll actually go ahead and take this dust up, and I will flip it face down into my arsenal. I will then, at the end of my turn, draw up to my intellect. I have 1 card in hand, so I will actually go ahead and draw 3 cards. Now, you will notice that because FaB went second, FaB also gets to draw up to 4 cards, up to their intellect, more specifically. This only happens during the first turn, mind you. So just keep that in mind for how this works. So now we'll actually go ahead and we'll go in for FaB. It is now FaB's turn. We are playing a Ninja. Ninja is very big about going wide and doing a lot of small little hits to eventually then do one big hit. Another thing that FaB actually does that I did not start out with because I'm a little silly is FaB starts out with a Phoenix Flame in the graveyard. That is specific to FaB's ability that is read right here. that you may start the game with a Phoenix Flame in your graveyard. You will see why this is important in just a second. So, now I'll go a little bit faster, see if you guys catch up, right? We are on FaB, and we have to do an ability. We look at the stuff in our hand, and we go, okay, yeah, those are some things, those are things. So, what I plan to do is I'm going to go ahead and Ronin Renegade. This card is going to come in for 3 damage. Say it right there. 3 damage to my opponent. I will then, because it costs 0, I don't have to pitch anything. So now it is up to my opponent to defend. So let's say I really don't want anything to do with that. And I go, well, you know what? I kind of would like to just defend all 3 of that damage coming in. I'll go ahead and block with a 3 defense card. Right down there at the bottom right, you remember that's where the defense value is. You don't have to pay for any of these if you're going to use them to block. That's just the case. So this gets blocked. Back over to FaB. FaB does not have any attack reactions in his hand. And personally, I know that the Dromai does not have any defense reactions in their hand. So with that being the case, Dromai will not be using any defense reactions, which means that this part of the chain is done. We will then move on to the next part, because as you've seen on Ronin Renegade, this card has Go Again, which means I get to add another link to this chain. Now what I can do is I can go ahead and play something like Rebellious Rush. I will go ahead and play Rebellious Rush. This Rebellious Rush costs 2 resources. In the top right, you see that. So I need to pitch something that is going to give me 2 resources. Lucky for us, this Cinderskin Devotion is blue, which means that when I pitch it, I will get 3 resources. You'll see it's noted at the top left of how many resources you'll get when it's pitched. So pitching that will get me 3 resources. 2 of them I have used on Rebellious Rush, but that does mean that I do have 1 floating resource here. Floating resources can happen. You can overpitch for cards because that is possible, but you cannot pitch for nothing. So for instance, in Dromai's case, she gets an Ash every time that she pitches a red card. You cannot just put 4 red cards into the pitch zone and then do nothing at all. That is against the rules. So there has to be a reason for you to be pitching, and in this case, it is attacking. So Rebellious Rush is coming in for 5 damage. Now, my opponent has to respond with defenses. 5 damage is a lot to take, and in some cases, you may just want to take it. But in the case of Dromai, we'll actually just, for kicks, block with this. So now, this is how this field would look. This is kind of like giving a physical example of what the stack would look like. But this is coming in for 5 damage. This defends for 3, Lava Burst, and this defends for 2, Ravenous Rabble. So that is 5 damage. It then moves on to my turn. I do not have any attack reactions. My opponent does not have any defense reactions. So this part of the link is done. Now we're going to go ahead and continue our move because we have Go Again. We do not need to hit our opponent in order for us to get Go Again. The card naturally has Go Again, which is very, very useful. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and then play Dust Runner Outlaw. Dust Runner Outlaw costs 1 resource and comes in for 4 attack and has Go Again, much like the other 3 cards did. Now, you'll see that there are no cards left in my hand. So how am I planning to pay for this 1 resource? Well, that is with the floating resource that we still had from the Cinderskin Devotion being put into the pitch zone. You do not lose resources over the course of your turn. Only at the end of your turn will you lose these resources, as well as any action points that you may have accrued. So we are still doing action point stuff, so we are totally fine. So now this Dust Runner Outlaw is coming in for 4 damage. So 4 damage is still a lot. So over here on Dromai, we're thinking, well, do we want to take 4 damage or not? I don't know. It doesn't seem quite like a good idea, but maybe we can just block a little bit of it. You do not have to full block every attack that happens, but do know that any damage that is spilled over from that, just essentially think that every card does damage based on the math afterwards. So because this is coming in for 4, I am blocking that for a 2 defense value. That means that this card, Dustrunner Outlaw, will deal 2 damage to my hero. Obviously, I have no defense reactions. This card in here, not a defense reaction. This is a attack. So I'm not able to defend with cards down here for any of this. This is only something that I can use as an attack. So now damage resolves for the first time. You have Dustrunner Outlaw coming in for 4. I'm blocking for 2. So Dromai will take 2 damage. And this is where FaB gets really, really awesome. So FaB has done 3 Draconic Ninja actions, right? More specifically, Draconic in a sense. This brings in FaB's ability. He has a once per turn instant, that is, you pay 3 to return a Phoenix Flame from your graveyard to your hand. This ability costs 1 resource less for each Draconic chain link you control. And because we control 1, 2, 3 Draconic chain links, we can take this Phoenix Flame from our graveyard and put it into our hand. Which is awesome, because as Phoenix Flame reads, it doesn't cost anything for you to play it, and if you control 2 or more Draconic chain links, Phoenix Flame has +1, and go again. So, I can then now play Phoenix Flame from my hand for 0, and it will come in and get 1 damage because we control 2 or more Draconic chain links. So now this will be attacking Dromai for 1 damage. Dromai will go ahead and take that damage because Dromai does not have any cards to defend with. She had used her entire hand to block the rest of these big attacks. So now, because I don't have any cards in my hand as FaB, I have no resources floating for me to use anything like my weapon or to do anything of this sort. I am ending the chain. The chain closes, which means that all of my cards, just like last time, will go into the grave, and all of Dromai's cards will also go into the grave. Then I will declare the end of my turn by flipping my pitch zone over, putting it on the bottom of my deck. I don't have any cards in my hand to put into the arsenal zone, so I will not be putting anything into arsenal. And then I will draw up to my intellect, which is 4. Now, remember, the last time, since Dromai went first, we got to draw up to 4 at the end of our turn. But after the first turn, you're out of luck. That means that Dromai actually starts her turn with 0 cards in hand. And this is a proper time to explain, why we kept a card like this in Arsenal, but it is more important to note that once after the first turn happens, every card that you use to defend, you won't be using during your turn. You don't get those cards back. They are not recycled back into your deck unless you play something like that. They are all put into the graveyard after the combat chain resolves. So, I'm sitting here with 1 action point, no cards in my hand, but 1 card in Arsenal. And it's a good thing that this Arsenal card costs me 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and play Dust Up. This is going to get a little repetitive because it is a lot of this back and forth kind of stuff here. Essentially, Dust Up comes in for 0, and when it hits, I can create an Ash token, then transform 1 Ash I control. But you see how it specifically says that it has to hit, which means that if my opponent wanted to block all of this, they could. If they take 2 cards that they have, such as Dustrunner Outlaw, and let's even say Flame Call Awakening. This defends for 2, this defends for 2, this comes in and attacks for 4, so the attack is fully blocked. Dromai does not have any other ability, no cards in hand, no arsenal, but In response, Dromai can do something. This is where your armor comes into play. Now, it doesn't really matter in this case because you don't have Go Again with this card. So you're not going to be getting to do an action afterwards anyway. But what Dromai can do is she can use her Silken form, one of her equipment pieces, and destroy it. When she destroys it, an Ash becomes an Ashwing. Essentially, this Ash gets put on top of, or this Ashwing gets put on top of an Ash, and this is now a creature that Dromai controls. This now resolves because there are no reactions from either player. These two cards will go to FaB's graveyard. This card will go to Dromai's graveyard. Because Dust Up did not hit, Dust Up will not create an Ash token and then transform an Ash. So, Dromai will end her turn with 1 Aether Ashwing, no cards in Arsenal, and then we'll draw 4 cards. And that will be the end of Dromai's turn. This essentially happens forever. At least this is the case over and over and over again. There are more advanced terms to talk about, such as pitch stacking and the utilization of certain abilities and auras and what your armor is based on, what it blocks for, arcane barrier. There's a lot of advanced stuff, but I wanted to mainly get touch into this specific stuff so that I can show you what it's like to battle in Flesh and Blood. And of course, these are only 2 decks. These 2 decks are unique in their own way, such as FaB being able to use a bunch of these Draconic chain links to get Phoenix Flames back from the grave to then attack your opponent for a small amount of damage, but normally your opponent has blocked everything previously, so you're able to get some free damage in over and over at the end of your turn. Dromai, although none of her dragons are actually in this Blitz Precon deck, you can go ahead and go online and find these dragons, such as, I'll put them up here, Invoke Chromai, Invoke Dominia, Invoke Yendurai. There's plenty of different dragons for you to find in Chromai's arsenal. They did not just put any of them into this Blitz deck. That's because these Blitz decks are made to learn. You're meant to learn with these Blitz decks. And then as you know more about the hero and you're more comfortable, you can go ahead and change your direction of your playstyle. FaB does not specifically have to use Searing Emberblade. FaB can use 2 one-handed Kodachi. Dromai does not need to attack with dragons at all. She can always go ahead and get an Illusionist weapon and utilize that to attack with the weapon. There's plenty of different ways to make your heroes, but this was just a small breakdown into Flesh and Blood. The easiest thing to understand, right, and the whole point of the game, get your opponent's life total to 0. That's it. All you got to do. And it's all in that same route. Person A attacks, person B defends. Person A has reactions, person B has reactions. Then that goes on until one person does not play anything, right? Until there's another defense reaction section. Then damage step happens. After damage, if you have Go Again, you can add another link to the chain, and chains can go on forever. I'm talking like 9 different things can happen in a chain link. So just keep that in mind, especially with ninjas. Ninjas are very good about making very wide chain links, as opposed to such things as like a brute, which is very big on doing one big swing at you, and you blocking a bunch of one attack, as opposed to blocking a bunch of very small attacks. And that is my small tutorial on Flesh and Blood. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I know it was a little bit longer. I did want to make sure I just really drilled in the detail for you guys. And let me know if it worked. Do you guys now understand how to play Flesh and Blood? Do you have a better understanding of how to play the game? Did I miss anything that you would like more clarification on? Would you like me to make shorter videos specifically on more advanced topics? Feel free to let me know. And again, thank you so much. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel as well. You know, I can't do this without you guys, and I'm happy to be a part of this Flesh and Blood community and teach all of you this. And you can also check out our Patreon in the description down below if you wish. but it's definitely not necessary. So, thank you all so much for taking an interest in Flesh and Blood, and I really hope that this helped you. As always, I'll see you all real soon. Nerd out.